What is good? We're here to talk about the 8Bitdo all-button arcade controller, aka Leverless controller. Some of my impressions of this controller so far since I've been using it is that it's really thin, especially if you compare this to the old arcade stick, one that has the actual joystick on it. That one is super thick, especially compared to this, but this is what you can achieve when you essentially have no moving parts. The number of buttons on this might kind of scare people at first, but I think it's one of those things where it's just like, it looks more intimidating than it is. You have 8 action buttons that are just used like face buttons on a controller. You have 4 buttons that are used for directional input. By default, this one has the Hitbox configuration, meaning that like you're basically gonna use 4 fingers for each of the cardinal direction input. I like the Mixbox input, and because this has 4 programmable buttons, and one of those programmable buttons is right above, you can get away with using the Mixbox or WASD controls on this, which I appreciate. When you turn this thing on, or at least the Xbox version of it, it has RGB lighting on it, and the RGB lighting actually looks pretty good. In person, it shows up pretty bright. If you're playing this in a dark room, you're really gonna easily be able to see this, and it almost gives the impression that the buttons are the color that's around the outer ring. One of the things that I really don't like about this though is the programmable buttons don't have RGB lighting. So if you're using the Mixbox setup like I was just talking about, the input that you would use for the up input has no lighting around it. With it being a matte top, and matte black top especially, kind of makes the button just kind of disappear into it, especially when the other ones have RGB lighting around it. So this has the LED for the charging port on the back here. It's kind of hard to see when you plug it in, so you're gonna probably have to orient this away from you so you'd be able to see what the charging status of it is. If you want to use this wirelessly, it comes with a wireless dongle that would be connected in this port back here, but I'm currently using that. You can also just plug in a USB cable into this USB port in the back, and then you can just use this as a wired controller. As far as the build quality of the controller itself, like this is very good quality. It feels like it's not gonna fall apart in your hands. It feels solid, got heft to it. It feels really good to touch. The top material here is tempered glass. On the website, 8Bitdo says that this is fingerprint resistant tempered glass. I will tell you that that is not the case. This glass is very much a fingerprint magnet, smudge magnet. Anytime you touch it, I feel like this thing just collects your fingerprints and stuff on it. The actual buttons in the material for the body itself is a more matte finish. I actually kind of wish the top was the same matte finish instead of the tempered glass, but it's whatever. On the back, there is this really nice anti-slip mat. On the mat itself, it has like a whole bunch of textured directional inputs and button inputs. That's just like a nice level of detail for a product like this. And on the very bottom of the controller, the 8Bitdo Leverless controller comes with this 3.5mm jack, which you can plug a headphone into, and allegedly you can hear game audio through the controller. Not really something I would do with this, but a cool feature to have nonetheless. So all of the round face buttons on the controller are gonna be 25.4mm or 1-inch diameter buttons. You can find replacement caps for these if you wanna do different colors or do clear or something. And then like the bottom one here that maps to the up input is a 30mm button or a 1 3/16 inch button diameter. I wish they would have just gone with one size for all the buttons, but it's kind of whatever. Again, I don't think this is really going to be a controller that you're going to be modifying all that much. And if you are going to be modifying it, it's going to be modifying the switches on this. So you can take the keycaps off, and then it's just going to reveal mechanical switches like you'd find on a keyboard. These are all low profile switches, and so you just have to find low profile switches that can actually fit into these. So these are like Kale Chocolate V2 series switches, I want to say. You're basically pretty much going to want to stay within that product line, because if you've never messed with switches before, you're going to find that it's the most inconsistent product line available, and there's just like a whole slew of switches that are just incompatible with other switches. And on the topic of switches, the switches that come with the controller are fairly clicky. So if you want to hear, kind of like using a mechanical keyboard, very tactile, very clicky switches. One of the first things that I'm gonna do is actually switch out these switches for silent switches, because I just don't want to hear the clicking all the time, especially if I'm playing a game like a shmup where I'm constantly pressing up, down, shooting something. Like, I just don't want to hear the clicks all the time. As far as functionality on the controller itself, it comes equipped with 6 different RGB modes. So if you want to just do different lighting patterns on your controller, you have 6 different options. 5 really, because one of them seems like it just turns the lights off. I don't know if I would actually call that a mode, but I'm not a huge RGB person myself, but if I am going to use RGB, I just have it on solid all the time and just mess with the intensity, or I just don't have it on. You can also set different profiles when it comes to the RGB lighting that you want for each button, as well as kind of the button mapping. There's a heart button that comes on the controller. You press that, it's going to change between like default, which default seems like you're just going to get all green lighting, versus one that you set yourself where you can change what you want the color pattern to be. And talking about more functionality on the controller itself, it comes with this thing called Fastmapping, which allows you to map the P1 and P2 buttons on the controller itself. And you do that by pressing the star button, the P1 or P2 button, whatever one you want to try and add a mapping to, and then whatever face button that you want to map that control to, either P1 or P2. So if you're trying to make mixbox controls, you would do the star button, P1, and then you'd press the up button. And then if you're in the default profile, the P1 button will map the up input, and then you can just use kind of the WASD mixbox controls. If you switch to your customized profile on the controller and you try to do that same sequence, it doesn't work. I don't know if it's just like my controller or if that's just the thing that's built into the controller itself, but like it just doesn't work if you're in the custom profile. And if you wanted to change the P1 and P2 mappings in your custom profile, you have to do that through the 8Bitdo Ultimate software itself. Speaking of mappings on a controller for P1 and P2, like you just don't get real good indicators of the mapping on the controller itself, and it doesn't reflect in the software. So it's really hard to tell when you've actually programmed the button and like to know if it's actually doing anything. There is kind of one indicator when you're actually doing the initial mapping. When you press star P1 or P2 and then the button you want to map, when you release those buttons, the LED above the star button will blink 3 times to let you know that a new mapping was created. That's the only visual indication you're going to get at that point. Whenever you press P1 or P2, that LED above the star button will blink just to let you know that there is an action happening, but it won't tell you like what action is happening. I had to open up the Steam input tester to be able to like test the inputs to like make sure that something was actually happening. When you've made a mapping, like say you do it and then you come back a week later, like you might not know what you mapped that button to, and you'd have to do it again just to make sure that it's still there. There's no visual indication of what button you've mapped to that without using the input tester or just directly setting it in the Ultimate software mapping tab itself. It's just kind of a feature that I think could have been fleshed out a little bit better, and maybe they'll do something better with it over time. But the way that I would actually suggest anybody who wants to do remapping of buttons on this controller would be to go to the Ultimate software. In the Ultimate software, there's a mapping tab, and on that mapping tab, you can literally map every button on this controller to whatever you want it to be. And it's reflected in the software, so like it's easy to tell what you have each button set to, and it persists between profiles. So if you want to do button remapping, I would highly suggest just doing it in the Ultimate software. It's just way more straightforward. So let's talk about some pros about this controller. The first one is that the Xbox version of this controller is $100, and at $100 I think this is actually a really good product. There are some leverless controllers that exist on the market now that are cheaper than this or around the same price as this, but what I think you get with 8Bitdo is a good product from a well-known company that comes with a lot of good support from the company itself, and there's a lot of resources available online, so if you run into issues, you can look those up. which is not necessarily the case for some of the more niche brands. Also, 8Bitdo is kind of known for making controllers and arcade sticks that are more mod friendly. While this controller itself is not easy to get into, you can remove the keycaps and then the switches for each of the buttons is revealed. Again, those are the only moving parts on this controller, so they're very easy to remove the keycaps and then remove the switches, and then you can put new switches in if you want. Another pro that comes with this controller specifically is flexibility. Flexibility in how you play this is kind of huge in my mind. Like, you can play this as a wireless controller or a wired controller, and that's not something that's always the case. Sometimes it's wired only, sometimes it's wireless only. And then also in the configuration for a leverless controller, it's something that you see more with leverless controllers now, but still a lot of the controllers that are in the same price range as this and that are way outside of the same price range as this, like the Razer Kitsune for instance, they'll only have one configuration, and it's normally the Hitbox configuration. If you're not a person that likes the Hitbox configuration, then you're just probably not gonna like leverless. But given that this allows you to also do Mixbox configuration, like, it just caters to more people and gives you as a player more flexibility with how you want to use the product that you bought. So we covered the pros, so we of course need to cover some of the cons. There are a lot of buttons on this controller. I personally have 4 of the 16 total buttons disabled where they just don't do anything. Since they did allow for there to be this Mixbox configuration, I wish this P button at the top here was a circular button and that it had LED on it like the rest of the other face buttons. The fact that this button doesn't have an LED on it, along the similar vein, I think the onboard mapping is a good idea, and like, once you figure it out, you kind of know how it is. Just this whole thing was more confusing than it should have been. That's just one thing that I hope they get right when it comes to firmware updates, is just making this a better process for doing the onboard mapping. And then the last con that I really have for this controller is I just don't like this tempered glass top, mainly because it's such a fingerprint magnet. Like I was saying, anytime you touch this thing, you're going to leave fingerprints or smudges or something on it. And they say it's like a fingerprint resistant top, but it's definitely not. So we come to the point, who is this controller for? If you're someone who has a lot of arcade sticks controllers or something, is this something that would really benefit you? And I would say it depends. If you're the person who is looking for a leverless controller that's not necessarily as small as something like the Hori Fighting Stick Mini, you just want a good product that's already made, I think this is a great controller because, again, the price point is really good, especially compared to some of the competitors in the same price bracket. It's a really good controller, low profile. This one especially is just like so thin that it's not going to take up a lot of space, and the surface area is still good enough because you get the ergonomic benefit like I talked about with being able to rest your wrist on the top of the faceplate, and you can put this on your lap. If you're someone who can overcome some of the jank of this controller, I think this is definitely one for you. If you just download the Ultimate software and use that to do any button remapping or like changing of the RGB that you want, it's a super straightforward process. In the final conclusion, would I recommend this controller? That's an astounding yes. I think for the price and for what you get out of this controller, it is definitely worth it. And so all in all, I'd say yes, 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 yes. I would absolutely recommend this controller. This is probably going to be my personal new daily driver. One of the things I really like about leverless controllers is like you just don't miss inputs, especially with the Mixbox configuration. Like, it's just too easy. It's so good. And that brings us to the end of another review. I do have the Switch version of this controller as well, so I'm going to do a review of that. And I do plan on trying to modify both of these just to do light modifications and put up a video about that. So if that's something you're interested in, please stay tuned to the channel. Those will be coming out soon. Also do have some game reviews coming up soon, and we're just gonna keep that ball rolling, keep the momentum going. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks for sticking around. I always appreciate the community support that we have going on here. Everybody who comments, interacts and engages with the video, thank you very much. I always appreciate having conversations with people, and it just, all of that helps the algorithm continue to show my videos to new people who then come and join the community. So please stay awesome, stay hydrated out there, and until the next time, deuce.